Rick, how you doing?
Keith Jones, I remember you vaguely, but now we're back together, so all of it's coming
I
back.
know, it's been a while, man.
How you doing?
When was the last time we saw each other? Was it around Thanksgiving?
No, Christmas.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Christmas.
think between Christmas and New Year's.
Good. How you been?
I'm doing great, man. How you
Good.
doing?
I'm doing great. You were in Hawaii.
I was in Hawaii. I was doing a little bit of training. I got a triathlon coming up in June, so I wanted to get some sea swimming in. You can only do so many laps in the pool and not, get used to that idea of being flat. You need to have this current, you need to have the sea salt, you need to have all of those upsetting things.
Yes. So how was it? Great experience?
It's wonderful. I love Hawaii. It's great.
Right.
Yeah.
Rick, how old are you now?
This is the kind of thing that troubles me, honestly. I don't talk about your bling. He just bought a bunch of necklaces on a trip to Paris. He had necklaces, he's got an ankle bracelet on. You can't see it, he takes all his stuff off before we start.
Not true, not true. I'm inspired. How old are you?
I'm gonna be 69 next month.
Wow, dude, and you hitting a triathlon.
Yeah.
I love it, and that kind of feeds into our podcast is today, regarding reality, reality and the story that we place on reality. So for example, if we talk about your age, I know only a few people that are in their late 60s, 70s who are as active and as adventurous as you are. But that's because they approach life in a different way. Their stories are different about the reality of their age.
I think we all do that, though, in a certain way. I think that the temptation, though, is to do more complaining than there is about doing more improving. Mm-hmm. And so we have this culture of complaint that sort of feeds on one another. You're another example of someone who's different. You're not the archetype for being, 49 now?
48.
48?
Easy, baby, easy.
I was hoping to get a rise out of you. You just turned 48
Yes.
like 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
So you're 48. Most guys at 48 are totally out of anything physical. They're really at the peak of their career and their power in their career, and they're focusing pretty much on that. The kids are in college or about to get out of college, and you're living the lifestyle more of a single 25-year-old.
Yeah, I guess in some ways, hopefully I'm not making the immature mistakes that a lot of 25-year-olds make or being self-serving. But as far as, taking care of my health and fitness and things like that, cultivating relationships, with the same zest and zeal that someone much younger would do, I hope I'm doing that.
Well, let's talk about that. What do you think the perception is that allows you to bypass all of the things that tend to bring people down at your age? And I'll tell you about some of the things that tend to bring me down. How do you bypass that? Because the reality is you're 48, and the reality is I'm going to be 69. How do you get past that and tell yourself that you can literally do anything that you'd like to do?
I think for me, what I do is I work on this up here. I train it every day, even more so than I train my body, is I train my mindset to not believe the thoughts that my ego presents to it.
Oh, no, stop. We need to get this clear. How do you train that? If someone's listening and said, man, I want what he's got, how do you start with that idea of training your mind? What do you do? You mean physically you can tell somebody how to do many reps and what kind of exercise protocol, but what do you do mentally to do that?
Okay, just like, if I was learning how to play the piano, that would require practice of learning how to read music every day, listening to people that are accomplished pianists, and in some cases it may require me to get a piano teacher. So I do the same thing for the mindset, and I read books that teach me how to live a stress-free life. They give me steps to follow. I talk to people like you who are peaceful in nature to help me do that. You become my teachers. I surround myself with a group of friends that are on the same quest, like Tim and Matt, who are living this very peaceful life that they cultivated. So that's how I've begun to train my mind, and I do it every single day. I mean, the negative thoughts, the chatter, the rumination, it is relentless and will not let up. And so I have to approach it with even more discipline and commitment than I do with staying healthy and fit physically. And so that's how I train my mind. Day in, day out, every single day, that's what I'm doing.
I also find for me that the practice is very important. Meditation for me is very helpful because meditation puts me in a place where there is no time, there is no age, there is no physical body. It's just sort of being. It's just being with yourself is enough, and it feels very, very healthy and good. And I also find that when I've done meditation religiously, which I try to do, but sometimes I miss, but when I do it often enough, I get into the practice of being mindful, and to me that means just going through a flow of life, like a Tai Chi practice, a flow of life where you're not judging everything that hits you as either good or bad. You're just sort of, okay, it's okay, it's okay.
Right.
And the point of that is that when you start getting into the judging game, when you start getting into the name labeling game of whether this is good and this is bad, the problem comes up that you're always in a position of feeling uncomfortable.
Right.
You'll notice more peace if you're able to avoid that. And that gets back to the reality idea. The concept of reality is really everyone's perception of what their life is about. And so some people have a perception of life that doesn't meet the model that's for the majority.
Right.
And those folks have a lot of problems. But even for those folks who are meeting reality in their own mind with what the reality is that we're all functioning in, they have issues too, because you can still focus on things that are negative and a problem for
Absolutely.
you and on limitation. So getting back to the topic, which is what we do with our personal stories, one of the things I think that's really important is to get out of your head about the story. If you think that everything that is possible in life began with an idea, everything, whether it's talking about the lights that are lighting us up right now or the shirt you're wearing and how to stitch the armholes, everything began with an idea. And to me, that means that everything is possible if you can think of it.
Right.
So we're all limited by some kinds of circumstance, but the weight that you give to the circumstance is what's important. And what I hear you saying is that you constantly train yourself not to look at the things that are bringing you down and things that are going to make you difficult, instead focusing on the things that you're able to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on. And I just come to the table from training my mindset. It enables me to come to the table with whatever the situation is. In this case, we're talking about my age, turning 48. I'm going to do my best with that situation, that reality. I'm 48. So how do I attend to being 48? If I was a person who wanted to be as vibrant as is humanly possible at this time in my life, what's the behavior that I would practice to be that way? So first of all, I would eat healthy. So I eat healthy. I would exercise every day. I surround myself with positive people that are like-minded, so I'm inspired and motivated by them. I do that too, so that box is checked. And in addition to that, I start to see, I've cultivated an attitude on a daily basis to see the good in every situation. Because I can either choose to see it good or I can choose to see it bad. The choice is mine. You know, Tim and I talk about this all the time, that, you know, you can have a peaceful world or a hostile world. It's the same world.
Boy, you know, that's very, very important. And this is something that's foreign, I think, to most ideas in the West. We think that circumstances are what control our lives, but it's really the attitude and the choices you make about the circumstances. Because life is going to throw you stuff that you don't like, but you can choose to make that a learning situation, or you can choose to simply say, hey, this is something that is a fact, but it's not value-based. There's no value on it. We were talking off camera about divorce, and you were saying that, you know, the fact is people are splitting. You don't have to get into all of the reasons why, or have your mind take off about how I'm being rejected, or the person didn't live up to my expectations, or chose somebody else over. You know, you don't have to get into any of that. You just deal with the fact. It's a separation, and now we move on.
Exactly. And when you deal with the other stuff about the person left me for this reason, or they weren't who he or she said they were, And you get into all this, I'm hurt by it, and all this other story that we collapse on the reality. And again, the reality is we're getting divorced and we're going in different directions. After you get past that, you can create another kind of story on it. I'm going to learn and grow from this. I'm going to learn how to be a better partner in my next relationship. Or I am going to be loving and hold space for, the person who I'm getting a divorce from. Just hold space and hope that they are happy and be unconditional in that want and desire for them. The choice is yours. But if you choose the former, in which your story is, I'm being rejected, they aren't who they said they were, they hurt me, or they are just impossible to live with and I wish them bad. If you take that on, let me tell you what's coming with that. A ton of suffering. I mean, you will not be free from it. It's going to follow you everywhere because you collapse this disempowering story onto just a simple reality of it's two people just going in different directions. But however, if you cultivate an attitude of wishing them well, not making anybody wrong for the relationship, not working out, if you cultivate that and just leave it simply as we're going in two different directions at this stage in our lives, then that opens up the space to be free of suffering, to be loving. A simple example would be in Arizona. Is during the summertime, it can get to 120 degrees. What I used to do of the reality of it being 120 degrees is I used to complain about, this is horrible. Oh my goodness, why do I live here? Like, I love being here fall and winter and spring, but summertime, this is ridiculous. Like, all of that being horrible and ridiculous is me putting a story on it being 120. But the minute that I stop resisting it and just say it's 120, that's what it is. There's no more suffering with it.
The suffering is a funny thing, because the more you get into this kind of thinking, the more you realize that most of your suffering, the things that really bring you down, are things that you create in your own head, stories about things. And you notice people that have a lot of hot buttons, people that have, they don't like this, they don't like that, this is uncomfortable, that person's wrong, this happened to me. All those people who are always considering what's happening to them and all those hot buttons that are being pushed, that's really like a whole life invested in suffering.
A whole life.
A whole life. And so, I mean, this is really kind of a selfish philosophy in the sense that if you can get past making negative choices and get past judging, you'll have less suffering, which will mean you'll be happier. And you won't have the grief that you have in your life that comes from doing all of the judging.
Exactly. Before we go, why don't we each give an example of how we, at one time, placed our story on top of reality and what the result of that was, as well as, an example of when we stopped doing that and what the benefit of that was.
Oh, sure. Well, I'll start with that. I think all of us have, when we're raised, I think we all have impressions about other people. You might say that people who live in a certain part of town, maybe they're more well off. Well, that means that they're snooty, or they have an attitude of looking down on people like us. And I used to have that kind of thing. I was raised as a working class kid in the sort of the bad side of town in a suburb of Chicago that was totally working class. And my folks were very nervous around wealthy people or people who were educated. And so I started to take that on. And then I started to realize, the more I do that, the more closed down I am and the less I understand about that environment and understand them as people. And of course, it took a couple of friends and personal experiences with those sorts of folks to be able for me to climb out of that and stop it. So one of the examples that I would give is just judging other people based on not personal experience but on learned experience,
right,
which has to be overcome in some way.
When you collapse that story that you created on top of the reality of that these are just people that are college educated and they live in an affluent part of town, when you collapse your story on top of that, did you suffer?
When I collapsed the story, in other words, when it went away and I saw them just as people, it was more of a joyful experience, like it is with anybody, where you don't feel any kind of weight dealing with them. Right.
And prior to that?
Well, before that, I'd stay away. I wouldn't even start a relationship with them. if I were in a room with them, I'd try to go to somebody else who was more from my background. And that applies to race, it applies to religion,
Absolutely,
it applies
totally.
to ethnicity. All of that, and that's something that keeps us apart from one another.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
We're
say.
all basically the same people. We want great things for our kids, we want to be happy, we want to be secure, don't want to feel like we're being bossed around, we want to feel creative.
So those are all the things we want, but if I'm hearing you correctly, the story that we collapse on reality, it has the exact opposite
Of that, which creates suffering, and it creates an enormous gap in your heart. It's a limitation that keeps you away from people who could otherwise be very fulfilling and satisfying for you to know.
Right. You know, what I've learned is pretty simple, you know, in having the business here with ToBeRe, is that when I collapse one of my stories or judgments onto a simple situation of someone sending me a message or calling me, telling me that they were not going to attend an event that they committed to, the thoughts and judgment about, well, this is what's really going on. They've been up all night drinking, eating, you know, partying, and they have this commitment, like all this other stuff that comes on, when the reality of it is they just informed me that they wouldn't be there that day.
Well, and what hurts you there, what the suffering is that your opinions about all of the stuff, the backstory.
Oh yeah, totally.
And may be totally wrong.
Totally, yeah, and it, more than likely it's wrong, but even if it's right, I'm still taking it out of the present moment, and it's creating this separation between us. So when I see you, I'm looking at you from a total judging thing. And then what would make my story even worse or me more right about it, which would actually mean more suffering, is that my concern about you not making the workout, you say, hey, I'm not feeling well, I'm not gonna be able to make it. And you know, I caught a cold, and then someone says, hey, listen, so-and-so was at the club last night, or they were at a wine tasting last night till midnight, so all of that, or, they were out, eating ice cream and root beer floats and whatnot. So when all of that happens, my story is like, or the judgment is like, oh, I knew it,
Yeah.
And so, but none of that matters, because what I really want at the end of the day is I want to have love and loving kindness and compassion be present in all my relationships. And that can't be there with my story. My story being there, it eliminates any space for love to be present. I can't have both. I can be unconditionally loving and supportive and non-judging, or I can have my story. And my story doesn't make room for anybody. So it squeezes everybody out. So what I've learned to do is, when that happens, is to just send love. Just send love. Like, it's cool. It's going to be all right. Because me being upset, mad about it, creating a story about it, doesn't change the reality of the situation.
And I would say, as one first step to help, if you want to try this new way of thinking out, is just to be mindful, just to be aware of what it is that you're doing. And so maybe instead of having a conclusion about things that happen in life, you first start by saying, whoa, that's just my interpretation, or that's just my story.
Right.
And so you're mindful of it, you're aware of it, you monitor it first. You don't have to do anything about it, just notice that it comes up.
Yeah, exactly.
That's your first step. Just start noticing, and you'll go, I think, in a better direction from there. And maybe you'll stop suffering, or start down the path where you can do more of that, so you don't create these self-imposed limitations that always result in suffering.
Exactly. I would say start with that first step. It's a big one, and that's going to go a long way. And then, if you get good at that one, then the next step is to have people in your life call your attention to it, because sometimes you won't see it. So I'm very fortunate, because I have you and Tim in my life to pull my coattails to it. And even when these guys do tell me, like, hey, Keith, you're collapsing your story on that, or you're judging, or whatever the case is, my ego comes up, like this, ready to defend that point of view, but because I know it's coming from a loving source, and I've given them permission to help me grow in this area, I simmer down and I listen. And as soon as I listen and I let go of the story, suffering is gone.
We're all defensive about our positions, because we all want to think that we're rational and we're doing the right thing according to what the information is that we have. I think we really do try to do that. But the problem is that there's nothing to be defensive about.
Nothing.
There's nothing to defend.
Nothing.
There's nothing to defend. You know, you show up, you walk in the earth, you're happy, you love other people.
That's it.
It's not that hard.
We make it hard, man.
It may make it hard. We gotta create all that. You know, us and them. And, you know,
Exactly.
you're separate. You're mean, and you know, I gotta work. I'm scared of you. And all
Yeah,
that.
exactly, exactly. You're a threat to me and my way of living, or it's just all.
Just be mindful when those thoughts come up that it might be your story instead of reality.
Exactly. Well, Rick, thank you for a great show, man. I love you, man. That's the reality.
I love you too, and thanks for giving me permission to
call him.
to say that I'm a jerk.
Okay.